Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending the Intuit QuickBooks Virtual Conference. The session we're about to do is called Tax Returns with QuickBooks Online. This session is about the QuickBooks Online accountant books-to-tax experience. We'll discuss working in QuickBooks Online to finalize end-of-the-year financial statements, transferring that into the trial balance utility, and we'll discuss trial balance utility and trial balance reports and all sorts of things. And finally, sending that information into Intuit Tax Online, the cloud-based tax preparation software that's compatible with QuickBooks Online. My name is Hector Garcia. I am a CPA, a member of the Intuit Trainer Writer Network. I have my own blog. You can go to qbblog.com where I discuss all sorts of QuickBooks and accounting-related issues. I am the co-host of QB Power Hour, which is a webinar series dedicated to QuickBooks as well, and I'm participating on this year's and the next 2 years Intuit Accounting Council. It's probably one of the greatest experiences of my accounting/QuickBooks career, and I'm extremely glad and happy to be invited to present today. Tom Palfreyman is the product manager of Trial Balance, which is the real guts behind getting this QuickBooks to tax transition, and he will be available for answers if you ask any questions via the chat. He won't be presenting, but he will be there. And if I do get asked a question that I get, let's say, quote-unquote, stumped in about the trial balance or the books to tax experience, I will evoke his knowledge if need be. Anyway, for the CPE process, you must stay through the entire duration of the presentation. That is 1 hour. It will be eligible for 1 hour of CPE. We will provide several CPE keyword questions during actually two during the first half and second half. Make sure you write them down, make note of them. At the end of the session, there will be a quiz asking you for those CPE answers. Only the ones that answer both of those CPE answers correctly will receive their CPE certificate, which will be sent via email. There will not be a printed certificate mailed or anything like that. It will be an email certificate, and give them about 3 weeks. You must keep a copy for your records. Intuit doesn't have a CPE repository or something like that you can pull them at the end of the year, so it is your duty to save copies of those CPE records. The learning objectives are identify how a current or the most current tax practices look like in terms of the books to tax workflow. So something like getting your financial statements ready and processing them, adjusting them, and taking them to the tax return. That's what we mean by workflow, and we'll discuss how some practices do it and some practices used to do it and that sort of thing. So we'll talk about that transition into that most efficient workflow. We're going to identify some of the inefficiencies with, let's call it, the old way of doing books to tax, most relevant on making tax adjustments and copying or keeping copies of your work papers and things like that. And finally, we'll understand how to go from QuickBooks Online Accountant into a Tax Online to maximize the most effective or efficacious, I heard that word the other day, so I figured I'd throw it in there, the efficacious way to do a books to tax workflow. All right, so let's jump right in. The agenda is we'll talk about visualizing your tax firm of the future. So we'll discuss the concept of working on this modernized workflow. We'll discuss some of the common year-end processes, things that I still do in my practice, things that I used to do and some of my colleagues used to do and still do depending on where they are, to this new 100% cloud-based year-end process, which is facilitated through QuickBooks Online. Then we'll talk about the difference between correcting errors and making adjustments and what that means to the tax preparation process. Then we'll discuss reports, the trial balance report, the adjusted trial balance report, and how those reports are significant to the books to tax process. We'll discuss adjusting journal entries and the report related to adjusting journal entries. So that would be probably about 40 minutes or so. And then we're going to go into the demo, and then we're going to demo QuickBooks Online Trial Balance. We'll demo Intuit Tax Online, and we'll discuss what the entire workflow looks like to get you thinking about, how or if you will implement this into your practice next tax season. All right, so your tax firm of the future. So imagine that the bookkeeping is completed either by the client, an external bookkeeper or pro-advisor that may not be your firm, or your own tax firm, and it gets done in QuickBooks. I'm not getting too specific on whether it's done in QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online. Just imagine that's just sort of your first phase. Then the idea is that we sort of click one button and that entire trial balance goes into a worksheet in which we use that worksheet to make our adjustments, adjust the numbers, make the tax level, tax-related adjustments, and that sort of thing. And then we take that finalized, adjusted trial balance, we click a button, and then it sends it to the tax software, so we don't have to rekey all the individual income and expense deductions, individual items in the balance sheet, and so forth. So under this concept, you would have, or we require to have, a single ecosystem for the entire workflow. You would have to have a central location where all the documents or work papers are stored. That way I don't have to go to a different portal or a different repository to pull those documents and work papers, and have a portal for team members and clients alike to request documents in the future. So if you prepare tax returns right now, you probably know the pains of getting a tax return requested by the client about 18 times a year. At least with my clients, somehow they always lose the documents and they request their stuff several times a year. So let's talk about a common year-end process. So the common year-end process, which we've done studies, or Intuit has done studies on how long it takes, to go from books into the tax workflow, into finally inputting all the information into the tax software, whatever tax software you may be using. The average is about 5 hours. So we're either hunting for errors, making journal entries, making journal entries, sending the trial balance into Excel, making calculations into Excel. In some cases, printing out the journal entries themselves, printing out the reports or the journal entries themselves, adjusting them by hand, making photocopies. That whole process is just very arduous, and it does take an average of 5 hours. And then when it comes to tax preparation, about 80% of tax preparers actually transcribe the data from the final trial balance into the tax software, which is probably the one that takes the most time. And then there is a specific process for just checking and double checking that the net income matches, that all the assets match, that the balance sheet match, that sort of thing. So using the trial balance process through QuickBooks Online, trial balance workflow, and then finally the tax return into a tax online, it has an average savings that Intuit has studied of about 2 hours per client. So that obviously translates into more profits, more efficiencies inside the practice. Okay, so what is the common books to tax workflow right now? And this is the sort of the premise or the assumption that we're making, that most firms are doing this, right? So the client works on QuickBooks Online or maybe QuickBooks Desktop all year long. Then the accountant logs into QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop and makes journal entries or makes or reclassifies transactions and adjusts the financial statements to look how they're supposed to look from a tax perspective, right? In some cases, they export the reports into Excel, make the adjustments on the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet itself is sort of quasi the work paper. Then at the end of the day, we print the final or the adjusted financial statements and trial balance, and then we give it to the internal data entry person, if it's not the CPA itself or the tax preparer, to actually key in every number into the tax software. But that's what the common workflow looks like. This is the improved books to tax workflow that we are presenting by working with Intuit Tax Online or QuickBooks Online and the trial balance. And this new workflow will be best if you actually use the Intuit Tax Online software, which we'll demo right at the very end. But if you are still going to use an existing legacy desktop tax software, then we can actually export the data into Excel at the very end, or CSV and import it if your tax software allows you to do so. Anyway, the new improved Books to Tax workflow is client works in QuickBooks Online all year long, or the accounting professional enters the data or makes the adjustment. Whoever is in charge of making this tax level adjustments makes all the corrections that we call client side, right? Client side corrections, like doing write-offs, reclassifying transactions. Most of these techniques are covered in Part 5 of the QuickBooks Online Cert Prep. So if you took the QuickBooks Online test, QuickBooks Online Pro Advisor test, Part 5 talks about some of those common tools. So the idea is that you first do what we call the client-side adjustments or corrections. That's what I call corrections. And then once we move into, okay, the client finalize their client-side corrections, and then we're going to make the accountant-side corrections, which may be related to just tax returns. So our financial statement from the client side may be 100% complete. However, we have to make a depreciation adjustment, a meals and entertainment adjustment, something that we don't want to put in the books, but we need to have a journal entry per se into it in order for the trial balance at the very end to show me the final numbers that will be transcribed or imported into the tax software. So that's what we're going to be calling an adjusting journal entry. So we'll discuss the specific mechanics around that in the demo section. Okay. So after we make the adjusting journal entries, which are our tax level or accounting level adjustments for year end, we also use that same process to document through work papers or notes why we're doing those, or justify why we're doing those. So in case of an audit or whatever, we can go back and say, listen, yeah, I made this adjustment because the client explained this, or because these documents were presented to me, and these are tax level or accountant level adjustments that we did not want to have as a client side adjustment. At the very end, you can either use Intuit Tax Online, which actually is being renamed to ProConnect as of tomorrow, so it's kind of bad timing. These slides were already presented with the old name, Intuit Tax Online. Now it's called ProConnect. We're going to transfer this trial balance information into the Intuit Tax Online or ProConnect tax software, or we're going to export the trial balance to CSV or Excel to then import into your other tax software if you don't decide to move into Intuit Tax Online this year or next year and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about conceptually, before we jump into the product, the difference between making corrections and making adjustments. Just to be clear, corrections are troubleshooting techniques where we try to fix the client side of the books. So the problem that a lot of accountants or colleagues of mine, CPAs, tax preparers, when the client gives them a set of books, and let's say, for example, accounts receivable is wrong, or accounts payable is wrong, or inventory is wrong, a lot of accountants make this sort of high-level adjustments where we get rid of the accounts receivable and write them off against income, or vice versa with accounts payable, write them off against cost of goods sold. The problem with making those high-level adjustments without correcting the error is that coming next year, the client is not going to have an accurate cost of goods sold, income, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and inventory. So these are the type of things that we recommend we make as corrections. Now, this is a different engagement than the tax engagement. This is more of a QuickBooks bookkeeping troubleshooting level of engagement. And the most common things that we do when it comes to troubleshooting is we identify unapplied payments to open invoices, and we match those. If there are deposits posted to income, and we have an issue with undeposited funds, for example, very typical thing, we're going to adjust those deposits, move them to undeposited funds, and adjust those undeposited funds manually, invoice by invoice. Applying checks or expenses to open bills to make sure that accounts payable is not overstated. Avoiding prior period checks. And again, on the QBO Part 5 Cert Prep exam, all these things are being explained. And then obviously getting rid of all these opening balance equity adjustments and moving them to retained earnings if that's where they belong. So that's the typical client side error correction that we make. Now, when we talk about making adjustments, this is after making the error corrections. We may also want to use other specific tools that have nothing to do with journal entries, like reclassifying the wrong expense account. So we recommend that you do that on the client side as a client correction, not as an adjustment. So adjustment is the next thing we'll talk about. So we'll get there soon. Deleting any duplicate or erroneous transactions, so things that didn't clear the bank, that are not real, deleting those, merging accounts or redundant accounts, and that sort of thing. That's also something we do as a client correction. And finally, consolidating accounts into sub-accounts. If, for example, we have parking and tolls sitting there as a parent account, and we have an auto expense or auto and truck expense, moving that into a sub-account to sort of clean those books up. So that's sort of the world of making corrections. Now let's move into making adjustments. Adjustments are things that are sort of beyond the correction process, where we need to make a journal entry to make the numbers work. Just for whatever reason, we cannot track the source of the transactions that need to fix that particular balance that we're troubleshooting, and we're actually making a journal entry for it to work. So what we recommend, once we are at the adjustments phase, which is when we're kind of squaring up our trial balance, is for us to make the adjustments into a journal entry and clicking on that little checkbox that says adjust journal entry. Really important piece. That way it classifies it as a separate journal entry, and we'll kind of show you that during the demo section, what that looks like. So just keep that in mind. That little checkbox is important when you're making a journal entry that needs to show up as an accountant level or an adjusting level journal entry. Okay, so we'll take a quick break for about a minute to show the CPE keyword. The CPE keyword is Spider-Man, so write that down. Spider-Man. You need to write down Spider-Man. At the end of the session, you will get a question about the CPE keyword. You must answer correctly Spider-Man in order to get your CPE keyword. And there's 2 CPE keywords, so you're going to have to write both of them. For the time being, let me just ask, are there any outstanding questions for me? Seems like there isn't, so that awkward silence means there's no questions for me. Okay, so that's CPE keyword, going once, going twice, Spider-Man. All right. So now, what is the significance of making an adjusting journal entry instead of a regular standard plain vanilla journal entry? Is that if we make a journal entry without that little checkbox, all those journal entries will be considered sort of client-side corrections, and they're going to be under the unadjusted balance. In QuickBooks Online, when we pull a adjusted trial balance report, they will be part of the unadjusted trial balance. And then any journal entries that we make that are part of our adjusting or our accountant side correction is going to be under the adjustment section. And then at the end, the sum of the two, or the accumulation of the two, would be adjusted trial balance, which is the last column, which is the column that we are going to finally use to prepare the tax return. So that's the importance of putting that little checkbox there. When we make an adjusting journal entry, in order to pull a report of all those specific journal entries that we made, we're going to click on the report section in QuickBooks Online, and we're going to click on accountant reports. So that's only part of the accountant's report, or the accountant's only reports. And we're going to look for a report called adjusting journal entries. And that will give you a list of every single journal entry that we made that was marked, that's a key element, that was marked adjusting. Okay? Now, once we move into the trial balance process, and we're going to demo this whole thing, we move to the trial balance process, you're going to see that the entire trial balance with all the adjustments are going to flow through the trial balance. In QuickBooks Online Accountant, trial balance is referred to a worksheet or a workflow, not necessarily a report. Okay, not necessarily a report. Okay, and somebody's asking, does the adjusting entry, is the adjusting entry only available to accountants? The answer is yes. Only accountants or accountant users can make adjusting entries, because the adjusting entries are meant to be for QuickBooks Online accountants only. Anyway, so we're at the trial balance, and we're looking at every single account and its previous balance, its current balance, all the adjustments through the year, and the adjustment at the very end. And this is where you can track all those changes. You can do the mappings of the accounts. You can attach work papers, and you can add notes. That's what that overview of that screen looks like. Okay. To go a little bit deeper onto what the screen has, we're going to have a section where we map every single account to the tax return. we're going to see a timeline at the top of all changes that are being made during the trial balance process. It's a really important piece. If, let's say, for example, today is February 10th, and I'm working on my client's trial balance for last year, and I didn't lock those books, and my client still has access to sort of sit there and make changes and adjustments to the previous year, it's going to keep a log of all the things that are being changed after the fact. We strongly recommend, as an accounting professional, that we don't want to work twice ever, right? That we lock those books and only put a password that we know, that way our client doesn't, quote unquote, mess up our workflow. And then once everything is done, all the attachments are added, all the notes are added, we can go into export to tax return, and then at that point we can either send it into a tax online if that's what we're using, or we can export it to CSV or Excel if we're going to use some of the tax software that does allow us to import that. Okay, all right. So we're going to go ahead and move into the trial balance demo. So I'm going to share my screen for the time being while I broadcast. Move into the trial balance demo. So I'm going to share my screen for the time being while I broadcast the screen and share the screen. I am going to ask if there are any pending questions for me, and then I'll also ask from whoever's helping me here if they can see my screen. And let me open up QuickBooks Online. So now I have QuickBooks Online Accountant. Can someone just kind of let me know that for sure they can see my screen?
I can see you, Hector.
So you see QuickBooks Online Accountant, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. So I'm logged in QuickBooks Online Accountant. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the client that I want to work in, so I can either find it in my client list or I can search it in there. Once I go into my client, I'm going to see on the right side of the screen where it says trial balance new, I'm going to see my new trial balance process. Again, this whole books to tax experience is dependent or the way Intuit has designed it. It has been designed around the fact that you are going to do some sort of account balance verification or accounting work at the trial balance level, making all the adjustments there before we send it to the tax return. So that's a really important sort of premise that Intuit has set forth, that, hey, before we go from the QuickBooks Online reports into your tax software, let's go through the trial balance worksheet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on T 2015 Continue Review or Start Review if you haven't done it before. Like, for example, for 2014, I could start the review. For 2015, I would continue the review because I already started it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and that's going to take me to the trial balance screen. Okay. So once you see the trial balance screen in the top, you're actually going to notice that this is not a trial balance report. This is a trial balance worksheet. So it's extremely important that you're aware that this is not a report per se. This is a trial balance worksheet. Now here on the first column, you're going to see a whole bunch of check marks. The purpose behind that is that we verify each of these balances through whatever our process is, whether we're looking at reconciliation reports or looking at bank statements, we're validating or verifying that all these balances are correct. So, for example, we see here cash on hand. Cash on hand has a balance of $67,705. Normally, you probably should have gone through the corrections process and figure out, if there are duplicate invoices in there or sales receipts or something making that cash on hand go. But let's say that for whatever reason our client says, no, that's an error, that's a duplication of income. What I want you to do is I want you to reverse that debit and move it into income. All right, so get rid of the balance, move it into income. Again, we're not discussing the validity of the adjustments, just making the premise for the adjustments. So I want to make now that balance zero. So I just do a regular journal entry, but where I encourage you to do your journal entries from is from this screen right here. So we're going to see up here where it says adjusting journal entries. And from this screen right here, we're going to click on that plus sign that basically enables the journal entry screen to pop up. So I'm going to move, let's say, $67,000 out of cash on hand and move it into our services income account. Okay, so I'm going to go into the little plus sign. Okay, so that will basically open up inside the QuickBooks file a journal entry. Up here to the left, I'm probably going to date this 12/31/2015. On the journal entry number, you can obviously give it whatever number you want. I'm going to call it year-end 2015 1. Okay, for whatever reason, this is going to be my first journal entry. So I'm going to come in here and do cash in hand. And I'm going to credit this 67,705.50. I believe that was the balance. We'll double check that in a second. And then I'm going to charge that against services. So up here on the right, it says it's adjusting journal entry. If I actually don't mark that checkbox, I really want to show you. So if I don't mark that and leave it unchecked and I hit save and close, what ends up happening is that adjustment gets done, and then I'm going to go ahead. That adjustment gets done here where it says on adjusted balance. We see that there was a change done, but it doesn't come in as an adjusting journal entry. That's the key component. We actually would like to see that in that worksheet. So it's right there. It shows in blue, letting you know that you made that adjustment, but because you didn't mark it adjusting, it does not show up under these two. So I'm going to click on it real quick, just so it can take me to my adjusting journal entries report, and I can, from there, I can just pick up and grab that journal entry. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that journal entry, and then I'm going to make the correction and make this an adjusting journal entry instead. So I'm going to click on that little checkbox that's there, and then I'll hit save and close. Okay, then I'm going to go back into my trial balance. So I'll click on accountant again. And then I'm going to search for my client. And then go back to continue review. Now, one thing I will suggest to you, just to make this process a lot easier, up here in the address bar, you see that there's a specific link that says App Trial Balance 2015. If I actually just drag that down here to my bookmarks bar, or I click on bookmark this page, either one works, and I'll rename this into trial balance or something like that. Then I may not have to click so many places to get back to trial balance. I can just click on that button and it will take me back here. So that's sort of a shortcut to get back into it. Anyway, so now we see that our adjusting journal entry shows up under the right column where it's supposed to. Our adjusted balance is not marked in blue anymore, letting you know that those adjustments were made correctly through the adjusting portion. I'm going to see the debit here, adjusting my income account, and then I finally get to see my last income account. Let's say I'm going to do one. I'm going to go ahead and put a check mark on that one, letting myself know that that has been verified. I'm going to add a note saying client stated that all cash on hand was duplicated income, made adjustment, or whatever note I'm going to put there. That becomes permanently part of my notes for that specific account. So I really like that because it's account by account. Here where the little paperclip is, I can click on that little plus sign, and I can attach, maybe an email that my client an email my client sent me that I printed into PDF, or maybe a written statement, or maybe some sort of document where the client calculated or came up with that information, and I'm sort of documenting, and that becomes part of my permanent work paper. So that's going to be permanently in the trial balance for us to recall or review in the future if we wanted to see what was behind that journal entry. Now, some people tell me, Hector, why wouldn't you just attach those documents into the journal entry itself? And that's okay. So yes, so let me go back into the journal entry. So could you open up the journal entry itself? And I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So could you, in theory, open the journal entry and attach the work paper right here? The answer is yes, you can do that. Could you add the memo here, the same note that my client gave me? Yes, you could. Could I add the memo in the description? Yes, you could. But they're considered two different workflows. So the information that's here would be accessible or viewable by your client, and sometimes you may not want to show them that because it could be confusing. But the information in the trial balance, I'm going to click on this link again, so it can send me back to the trial balance. Information, the trial balance is only available to the users of QuickBooks Online accountants, right? So that would be up to you whether or not you actually want that client to have access to those work papers and those notes. That is the reason why we want to have them up here. Okay, so I'll do one more here. So to say this PayPal account, I'm going to go ahead and make a journal entry and do a debit for $136.50. Select PayPal. Okay, make sure that my journal entry right now is numbered correctly, so that's good. Number 2, let's say I'm going to adjust that against bank service charges. I'll make it an adjusting journal entry, hit save and close. Okay. Yeah, so I was off by a couple dollars here, as you can tell. It's $138.56. I'll just go back and fix that real quick, because what I want to do is make that account 0. So let me go back and click on that journal entry and do 138.56. Perfect. Save and close. Go back into my trial balance. And again, based on the premise that everything is cloud-based, we don't have any offline notes or anything like that, we're going to go ahead and mark that as complete. Add a note saying PayPal balance was 0. Add an attachment possibly of my actual PayPal statement. So there's my actual PayPal statement that I'm uploading there, maybe a screenshot or a PDF of it. Assuming that's not my actual PayPal statement, but I think I have one of them here somewhere. Not, you get the point. I don't actually need to upload an actual PayPal statement to make the point. But so what I'm saying is we upload our PayPal statement. Is this it? Yeah. No, that's not it. Okay, it's fine. So we upload our PayPal statement. We leave it there as a permanent work paper. And then the idea is that we go down the line and we adjust every single account, and we use this as sort of our work papers for everything. And that's trial balance in a nutshell. We see the adjusted trial balance here, and we can always go into here and do this. Now, up here where it says finish review, if I am completely done, what I want to do is I want to freeze the workspace. That way, no one else can come in here and make changes, add notes, remove notes, or add anything to it. The idea is that this is sort of finalized. We can actually click on Archive to Zip, and it's going to download an Excel file of a trial balance and all of our notes and work papers and all that stuff. So we can also archive that. And we've marked this as review completed, which basically means we are ready to file the tax return. Okay, so before I go back into the presentation, yes, Tom, was there a question?
Yeah, just one quick note. There is a way to navigate back to trial balance from the accountant toolbox, that briefcase drop-down. If you click on that little briefcase to the right of the green bar, then you can navigate back to trial balance from wherever you are. Just so that
thank you so much. So yes, I completely overlooked that. That's why I put the bookmark up there. But you're right. So if I happen to be inside of a report, so thank you, Tom, for bringing that up. So if I'm inside of a report, let's say here, and I don't have to go through the whole, bookmark situation, I can just click on the tool, on the briefcase, and go to trial balance, and that will take me back to it. Thank you very much. Was there any more questions, Tom, or was that it?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, all right. So again, I know the title of this session is Preparing Tax Returns with QuickBooks Online. However, the trial balance process is pretty much the most time-consuming of it all. With Intuit Tax Online or ProConnect Tax, which is a software we're going to show in a little bit, the idea is that you actually don't do a lot of work at the tax return level. All the work is done at the trial balance level. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Report and click on Accountant Report and show you the regular trial balance versus the adjusted trial balance. So if I click on a regular trial balance, and then I'm going to go ahead and click last year, because we're working on last year's, and then click on Run Report, I get a regular plain vanilla trial balance. Notice my cash on hand is 0. There is no way to know the adjustments that were made here or the type of adjustments that were made here. The only thing I could do is I could click on that 0 and look at the history and notice that there was, in fact, a journal entry, a trial balance, a journal entry done at the adjusting level. Okay, so through this report, which is what your client will see, not the accountant user, but the client will see only, they're not going to see any of that stuff. However, if I go into report, accountant reports, and I click on adjust the trial balance, which is accountants only, so only the accountants can see that. If I click on that adjust the trial balance, I now get all the layers, right? I get, let me just put here, last fiscal year, because this defaults to last month, and I'll click on run report. So I'm going to get my original client-based, client correction side trial balance. I'm going to see all my adjustments, and then I get to see the adjusted trial balance. Now you could essentially add some notes into this report if you wanted, or you could even export to PDF, export to to Excel, send it to your client. You could give access to your client to these reports in one way, shape, or form, but it's not a report meant for the client to pull or let me end my screen share, and hopefully we can now see the slides. Are there any more questions, Tom or Carol? Any more questions?
There are, this is Tom. There are a couple of questions, but I just now saw them because they just came up. So let me see if I can handle them on my end, and I'll bring them up if we need to, okay?
No problem. Yeah, somebody's asking, why don't we make the adjustments straight into QuickBooks? So we actually are. We are making the adjustments straight into QuickBooks, Barb. So, but the way we're doing it is through the trial balance worksheet. So through the trial balance worksheet, it's how we're starting or executing that journal entry. The other one says, can the client see the documents you attach? So only if I attach it on the journal entry itself, the client can see them. But if I attach them into the trial balance, you won't. So that's kind of the purpose of doing the trial balance. All right. So the CPE keyword is Wolverine. So write that down. I guess we have a superhero theme today. The CPE keyword is Wolverine. So write that down. That's the second CPE keyword, Wolverine. As a kid, that was one of my favorite superheroes, for sure, Wolverine. Okay, so the CPE keyword is Wolverine. That is the second one. The first one already passed. I can't repeat it. It passed a couple minutes, like 10, 20 minutes ago. So the second CPE keyword is Wolverine. Then somebody says, can you enter journal entries so they won't be posted into QuickBooks? That's a really good question, Jason. The answer is no. These journal entries will affect QuickBooks. However, when I go back into the demonstration, hopefully I'll remember, I'm going to show you how to omit them from your financial statements. It's actually kind of a cool process. So Jason's asking, can you make a journal entry that doesn't affect QuickBooks? The answer is no. However, we can omit adjusting journal entries into QuickBooks, so I'll show you that process. Somebody says, can this import into 1120s, 1120s, and Schedule C 1040? So we'll talk about that in a second. So we'll answer that question, David. So CPE keyword is Wolverine. And all right, so let's go to the next slide. So now let's talk about the books to tax experience. So after we made all the adjustments into the trial balance, you're going to have essentially two choices. One, send the information to Intuit Tax Online or ProConnect, they just changed the name, which is basically going to autofill all the numbers inside your tax return. The numbers are affected by QuickBooks Online, of course. Obviously, there are certain things, like how long you've been in business, or when did you establish the S corp, or what's your industry code, or all that stuff you're going to have to fill in manually, right? Number of partners information. That's not going to come through QuickBooks. That will not come through QuickBooks. Okay. All right. So once we send that into Intuit Tax Online, then we use Intuit Tax Online or ProConnect to prepare the return, and then basically that's it. We don't have to print anything, transcribe anything. Now, if you are not using Intuit Tax Online, you don't want to use Intuit Tax Online, you're not ready to move to Intuit Tax Online, whatever the situation may be, and you're working with a tax software that allows to import these trial balance entries, either through an Excel file or a CSV file, you actually have the ability to export your tax mappings or your final trial balance into CSV, and hopefully you're working with tax software that allows you to import those instead of transcribing those. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do a demonstration of that. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, select my screen. Okay, and there is a silence because I'm waiting for the screen to show up. So while the screen loads, I don't really say anything. Okay, so let's see, minimize this, and now you should be able to see QuickBooks Online Accountant. Is that right, Tom or Carol? Can you, or Elizabeth, can you confirm that you can see my QuickBooks Online Accountant screen?
Hector, I still cannot see your QuickBooks Online Accountant screen. I'm still just looking at the deck.
Okay, all right.
Hector, please click the broadcast to audience link. Thank you.
Sounds easier than the way you stated. Let me see. Give me 1 second. I'm still transferring that. Select my screen. It says connecting, so yes, I have to wait. Okay. Let me see if there's any questions I can answer for the time being. Somebody said,
Hector,
if I don't have... Yes.
Oh, sorry, Hector. This is Tom. I was going to say there was a question for you to show when you get a chance to show how the books get closed. When you get a chance to show how the books get closed in QBO. That might be a good thing for you to share.
Yeah, great question. So I clicked on broadcast my screen to the audience. I would like to now get confirmation that my screen is being shared, and you can see my QuickBooks
Yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect, thank you. Okay.
Yep,
I think we have a team here.
right now.
Good thing we have a team here. If not, that wouldn't be that wouldn't work too well. So yeah, so to close the books, and that actually would be kind of nice if there was a link here somewhere to go straight to that. But no, the way you close the books is you have to go into your QuickBooks client itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that plus button, or I can use my client switcher in the top to pick what client I want to go to. So I log into my client's QBO account. I'm going to click into the gearbox on the top right and click on Account and Settings. So again, I clicked on the gearbox on the top right and click on Account Settings. And then I went into Advanced. And then right here where it says Validate Books, or where is it? Here, Accounting. I click on that accounting area, so it's under Advanced Accounting. I click on Close Books, and then I'll give it a date. So I'll put 12/31/2015 and give it a password, right? So I'm gonna put a password. I'm gonna put 2500 2500. So if my client freaks out asking me for a password, I'll tell them the password is $2,500. And when they ask me why $2,500, I'll tell them because that's how much I'll charge you to fix it if you screw things up. Anyway, all right. So let me go back into my QuickBooks Online Accountant screen, and let's now go to the process. I close the books, right? So I showed that example. Let's go to the process of sending this over to Intuit Tax Online, or ProConnect, right? So keep in mind with the new name. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my trial balance screen again. And again, this is sort of the originating factor for all, because the idea is that you close the books and you freeze the workflow, you make the adjustments all from here. Then we're going to do our tax mapping. So right here on the right of working trial balance, I'm going to click on tax mapping. And then basically, I'm going to have the ability to adjust what lines on the tax return every one of these accounts go to. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to review again, so I don't have this area locked in. So let me go ahead and click on, for example, rent, and then I will assign it to I'm going to click on the mappings, and I'm going to go to every single line. And again, just for some context for non-tax people real quick. So if I pull up an 1120, I'm going to pull up an 1120S real quick. And if you're a tax person, I apologize. I'm taking you through something that's really basic that you know. But if you're preparing the tax return, it's asking me which line is my QuickBooks Online chart of accounts account supposed to point to. So for example, rent is supposed to point to line 11 rents. Okay, so I'm going to go to line 11, rent, and tell it that that total rent amount should hit that account. And then you can do the same thing for your Schedule L, which is all your balance sheet accounts, and you have to map all of them. If you don't map anything, it's going to be sort of left out. So in this case, I actually mapped capital, retained earnings. I probably want to be careful with mapping these correctly or not. So after they're all being mapped, I can freeze the workspace or finish the review. That way people can't mess with it. And then I'm going to go into View Tax Return. And then I can either create a new tax return into a tax online, or I can update with the new balances. And actually, I was working on one. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the one that I was working on, hit Continue. And then it's going to say, hey, if you had something else in your tax return, it's going to be replaced completely by the new information, and that's fine. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to hit Continue. So now that's going to open a new screen, which is Intuit Tax Online, right? Or tomorrow, as of tomorrow, it will be called Pro Connect. So once I go in here, you're going to notice that, let me go into every sheet here. We're going to see that my company name and address, in this case, I didn't have an address in there. But my company name and address is going to come in automatically. Let me go into the input window again. Give me 1 second. Okay, so let me start with the workflow. That way we're not, because I notice a lot of you are maybe looking at Intuit Tax Online for the very first time. So we have our tax return loaded. Under Profile, this is sort of the high level worksheet where we can actually get whatever information about things that were not populated for whatever reason. If there was an error during the mapping or the population, it will let you know. Or if there was a change from the books to tax import, if you were messing with the QuickBooks Online file. Then in here, you can sort of use the worksheet to say, look, we are going to e-file the federal return. We are going to e-file an extension, that sort of thing. This is just to let you know what you're going to be working on as you prepare the tax return. Then in here, we get to choose if we're going to add a state return. Under Input Return, this is now where we can actually come in and modify every piece of information. We can actually search through the search. Actually, this is very, very cool. We can search within the tax return anything we want, really. If we don't remember where we input it, but maybe we remember the name or the amount, we can search it through here. We can go into each section of the tax return itself. So if I wanted to go into the schedule, let's say I want to go into the schedule in the balance sheet, and then go into the balance sheet. Here's my worksheet for my balance sheet, and this is where I can put specific items here, sort of a depreciation difference. If I wanted to work with my M1, I can make all my adjustments here in my M1 form. If I'm going to choose, let me scroll all the way up and go into ordinary income, and then I'll click under income. This is where I can manually input the income on the return itself. So I can actually go into each of these sections here on the left side, which are sort of organized by general category in the input section. If I go to check return, that's sort of the next step. If I go to check return, I can actually start visualizing some of the summaries on the tax return. So we see that the income, cost of goods sold, all that stuff, this is how it came in. Look how rents came into the right category. A few accounts were mapped to advertising. So this is sort of the worksheet. If I click here where it says U.S. tax forms, I can actually see what the tax return looks like. Okay, so if I click on 1120S, this is what the tax return looks like, and I see the tax return all filled out. I can double click on any of those lines, and it will take me into the input screen directly if I want to make the changes to it. Let me go back to the tax form. I kind of like the tax form view. I think it's just sort of the best way to illustrate this. So all these numbers came from QuickBooks Online, and they were pre-mapped, okay? So whatever was joined together, like in this advertising account, there were several accounts that we told it that they're all going to go into advertising. So that's sort of a pre-mapping work that we did. So that's basically how it is. I don't have time into getting into the nitty-gritty options of Intuit Tax Online. But once I'm done filling all the information, I click on File Return, and then at that, when I'm at this step, I can either just do an e-filing as long as all my e-fin information is there, et cetera, or I can go to View Print Return in PDF, and I can actually see what that return looks like, and I would get just a full PDF of the tax return. So if I'm just sort of reviewing it, sending it to the client for review, or maybe I want to go to share PDF via link. So if I click on that, my client is going to get a secure link to open the return. That way I don't have to attach it to an email like a lot of people do. If I click on View Return, I see what the actual return looks like with the introduction letter, with all the schedules, with all the worksheets, all the entire tax return is done there, signed by the paid preparer. So it's really, really, really neat, this value proposition of working entirely on the cloud, even for tax software. Now, a couple of important things. Here in the top right, under Notes, I can just free type notes in there. So if I want to do sort of notes beyond the QuickBooks Online type of notes, I want to do notes like, you know, client was missing ACA forms or whatever, something like that, something that would be useful for me in the future. Not that I should be preparing a return with the missing forms, but what I'm saying is whatever notes I want to put, that becomes part of my tax return notes. If I want to request specific documents, I can click on Data Request, and this is actually pretty neat. There's essentially two processes for data requests. There is a document request worksheet where I can actually tell Intuit exactly what I want the email to look like with the request, and I can say, look, I want you to request a W-2, 1099. I can get rid of some of these. This worksheet kind of presets all the usual forms where I send the client an email with that invites them into a portal where they can actually individually fulfill each of these requests by uploading the documents. And then once those documents get fulfilled, we click on the document section, and anything that the client uploaded would be sent up there. So we're doing just sort of this digital request that's called Intuit Link. Or if you don't want to do a sort of digital request, we can actually do a worksheet that we can print, and we can send the client sort of a tax organizer with all these questions. So you don't have to necessarily request it digitally. Okay, so I mean, so basically, those are the additional sort of tools inside Intuit Tax Online that help you with the document request section. So we're talking about requesting W-2s, requesting that sort of information. Okay, all right. So that's Intuit Tax Online in a nutshell. Let me go ahead and go back into the trial balance screen, and let me find out if there are any more questions. So Tom or Carol or Mike, are there any questions outstanding for me?
Yes, Hector, there's one question about what is the pricing for Intuit Tax Online?
Okay, yeah, good question. So when you are in Intuit Tax Online and you click on Purchase on the left side, you basically are going to purchase based on the number of returns. So it's not like the traditional software where you buy the software and it comes with, you know, so many tax returns. This is all done in a sort of one-to-one basis. So we can actually buy them in bulk and get a discount. In some cases, you know, they have discounts when you buy them before the year starts. So I think that if you buy the 2016 credits, there's a discount on that and that sort of thing. If I click here where it says View Tier Pricing Model, it gives me the tier pricing. So obviously, the more returns that you do, the lower it is. So if you're doing more than 300 corporate returns, they're $23 each. If you're doing more than 300 personal, they're $10 each. Before you buy the credits, per se, we can actually put here, look, I do 120 individual, and I do about 75 business, and then we see exactly what the bill would be here, and we can pre-buy them in bulk and get the discount, or we can buy them one by one as we need them. Okay. Now, the tax software that I buy, the desktop tax software, it's about $3,000, $4,000, somewhere around there for unlimited returns. So volume matters. If you're in a really, really high volume and you're price sensitive towards the cost of your returns, and you see no time reduction in terms of the entire workflow to go from QuickBooks Online into ITO, then you probably want to stick with your tax software, whatever you have. But if you see a humongous time reduction and efficiency going from QuickBooks Online to trial balance adjustments into ITO, then I just ask you not to look at the cost of the software apples to apples, because it's not apples to apples. It is not just online tax software charged by the unit. It's the entire package: QuickBooks Online, trial balance, and Intuit Tax Online. Has most situations, so most of the entities, 990s for nonprofit, 1120S, 1120, 1065, those are all covered. The ones that are not covered are 706s, 709, and 5500s. It has over 5,600 built-in forms. The one that I personally have not tested, so I'll ask Tom for this. Schedule C, can you go from a QuickBooks Online profit and loss into a Schedule C on a personal return? I have not personally done it, but I assume you can based on the options. So Tom, I'll ask you to double check the answer to that.
Yes, you can. That's a true statement. You can. It supports Schedule Cs. And one other question that I see, and maybe I'll just answer it real quickly if it's okay, Hector, is what about prior years? So we do support the carryover of prior year data into a Tax Online. So if you had a prior year return, you would get prompted to ask you if you wanted to carry forward the prior year balances. So last year's ending balances would become this year's beginning balances, and we carry that forward automatically.
Now, Tom, I assume that if we are going to go from QuickBooks Online into a Tax Online, and the beginning balances for the balance sheet are wrong, the carryover is going to cause a problem in the first place. So you may have to make sure, double check, triple check that in your QuickBooks Online, your beginning balances are correct before you move them over. And that's the purpose of closing the books, right? That's the total purpose of closing the books, yeah. Okay, so are there any more questions? We finished exactly on time, and I think we covered everything we're supposed to. Were there any more questions for us?
Hector, there are several more questions online, but I'm not sure the right process. I'd love to answer them all, but I think we have to stop. But I'll ask the presenters if there's, or the folks helping us with the webinar, if there's any way that we can stay and answer questions.
Okay. The last thing, if you're a pro advisor, you can request to get 2 free corporate returns and 5 free personal returns. The idea is that you play with it, be familiar with it before you can just switch over your entire practice to it. So if you are a pro advisor, QuickBooks Online accountant user, you can get 2 corporate returns and 2 personal returns for free. I don't know if it comes with, the state ones are included on that, but for sure you can do 2 corporate returns and 5 personal.
And everyone, if you'd like to have additional, questions answered, feel free to go over on into the networking lounge. At this time, the session has concluded. Thank you for attending, everyone, and have a great rest of your session. Be sure to take the quiz at the end of this session as well to get your credit. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.